Hi, my name is Niall Daly, and I'm a social worker and associate lecturer at Middlesex University. My practice background is mainly systemic family work and generic. I work with both children and families and older people and psychiatric social work. So a lot of my practice has been working with families where there's a component of psychiatric ill health and also a lot of childcare work as well, children being looked after, and using a systemic framework in fieldwork practice. I also am an associate lecturer here at Middlesex and teach across the broad range of programs, social work programs, CPD as well as qualifying programs. And I'm currently in practice as well doing emergency duty social work. Strangely, that's a difficult question because I liked a lot about the book and I'm trying to sort of integrate the reasons why I liked a lot about it. For me, the book was refreshing and new, and it was refreshing and new because it's built bridges. It built bridges in my thinking, and it built bridges in how it conceptualized certain aspects of social work practice. So to me, I saw the book as a synthesis between our internal processes about how we practice as social workers and how that affects service users and the models and methods and theories that we use. So to me, it was the book was building bridges around how we synthesize our work across several sort of domains or several areas of thought and practice. So one of the things I liked particularly was how case studies were used incrementally. And there's a parallel story about how as reading the book, there's a parallel story about how I was perceiving things, theoretical thoughts. There's a parallel journey that I was making in my own thought alongside the parallel journey of discovering more about what was happening to a service user. So that was sort of quite an interesting process. The other thing I liked about the book, so for me it's both. So I had two hats on reading the book. One was as a practitioner, about how I'm going to use this book in my practice, and the other as a teacher, how I'm going to use this book in my teaching capacity. So that was interesting for me. So the other thing that I liked about the book was how some quite complex formulations, some quite complex theoretical issues were managed to be talked about in a not a dumbed down way, in a real way. But I don't think one could have got to talk about those complex issues or understood them unless one read the book all the way through. So there's an incremental build-up of how we reflect, how we integrate theory into our reflection, how we integrate theory into our practice. So by the end of the book, one's dealing with quite a lot of complex issues in a surprising sort of way. So I like the incremental build-up of the book. So for me, it was the case studies, the invitations to reflect, and the synchronicity between theory, but also heartfelt. I'm struggling for the word to describe it, but I actually I could feel quite emotional reading the book. Some of the stories, they're not unusual stories to me, and to most social workers, that the case studies are real, but I could actually feel some emotion stirring as I read the case studies, which is actually not unusual in practice, but unusual when you're reading a book for me. So that was useful. So there was an emotional relationship I had to the reading, as well as a theoretical relationship, as well as a sort of pragmatic relationship. And so talking about a relationship with a book is actually quite unusual. It's unusual in academic circles talking about a relationship with a book. So I quite like that. That's for me, that was the difference that this book was. I tend not to like social work textbooks. I find them are useful, but I tend not to like them. I like this book. you might be surprised it would be difficult for me to have one word, but I think I was going to use courageous, but then I thought actually that could be interpreted in lots of sorts of ways. I mean, it's courageous because it's different and it's out there. I don't mean it's courageous because it's not valuable, but I've changed my mind and I'm going to use the word heartfelt, because I actually think that it's a very heartfelt book. It stirred something in me. Now there's so many, which one did I like? I've written it down, hang on, it's page 44, which one was that? It's hard to identify the case study I like because, as I said before, a case study, it's not just one case scenario and then that's to explain the point. The case studies are incrementally developed upon. So it's a story that, rather than a case study, it's kind of like a case story that one is revealed to you. And if you picked up the book and flipped through it and read one case scenario, it would be a different story according to the previous reading, because you're invited to reflect on the previous scenario for the same service user. So it's difficult to identify one case study. But the one, for the purpose of this, the one I've identified is no longer going home for the weekend. So Jack has got ADHD and some behavioural difficulties, and he's fostered with what seems a lovely, caring foster carer. Social worker is very committed to Jack and working with Mum, who has her own problems as well. And Mum Mum has decided not. Jack is in care, being looked after in a foster care by the foster carer during the week and goes home at weekends. Parents are estranged from each other. This weekend, Mum has decided that she has other matters to attend to, a new relationship, and at the last minute tells the social worker and asks the social worker to tell Jack that he can't come home. And the particular case scenario that's talked is a conversation between the social worker and Jack, and this is the first time he's not gone home. So it's that description of that conversation. That description of that conversation I found really fascinating, because it's also quite a real conversation, but it's also so much of social work education is, we have a sort of deficit model quite often where we talk about things not working well and how not to do things. This isn't quite the opposite of that, because in my view the social worker didn't handle it very well, but at the same time her ability to recognise Jack's emotions, or recognise that there was something there, was present. So we have an example of a caring, well-meaning, skillful social worker not getting it right, and that could have been me. So to me that's a useful illustration about how our hearts can be in the right place, how we can be in the right place, but actually we're doing it wrong. So it's the integration about the being and doing that perhaps I talked about before, I'm not sure. That as a teacher, I struggle and try to find a way of actually integrating the being and the doing. Because there's so much of practice is around, and so much expectation from student social workers and qualified social workers to get a toolkit, to get processes. They want something in the bag they can go away with, where actually they can't have that unless they also have the ability to use it, and that's the being bit. And it's the integration of the being and the doing that this book integrates very well. And this case study shows me that, because the social worker was being in the right place but not doing the thing that was most effective. So to me it's an invitation to learn more, or to learn more about how the social worker could have been different at that moment. Sometimes we can get a little bit burnt out, or a little bit fed up with the process of social work, with the McDonaldization of social work, as David Howe would say. And this is kind of like a kick to say actually it's more than that, and it's difficult. So many textbooks simplify things, and this doesn't do that. It doesn't complicate things, but it doesn't simplify things. So it's an invitation to to the reality of social work. So whenever we're feeling a little bit de-skilled as experienced practitioners, this is a book to go to, I think. So that's why I'd recommend it to colleagues. There's an invitation to start thinking again. And to practice colleagues, to teaching colleagues, I'd recommend it because, because actually I wanted to start photocopying it when I was reading it. I wanted to start photocopying the case studies and the reflective questions and start using it. And I've not been excited in that way about a book for a long time. So as a resource for teaching, I think it's instantly usable. So I'd recommend it in that way. I get told constantly by students when they come back from their placements, they talk about the real world, as if I'm not in the real world, or if people at university aren't in the real world, and I find that difficult to comprehend. Really, it's all real, and somehow the doing has more of a currency for students at times, whereas there has to be an integration. So this book integrates the doing and the being, integrates the theory of things, thinking about things. But it's more than just models of how to apply things. It's models about how to conceptualise and how to look at yourself, how to be aware. And it's that's awareness, that social work and awareness of oneself, one's own emotions, from different perspectives. And the book gives several different perspectives.